Esther Feltz here with you through till 6 o'clock. A suitably portentous press conference given by the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, saying we are at a crossroads in history today. He was asked by a reporter, is the US an unreliable ally? He says no. The US is not an unreliable ally, as he announces a plan to allow Ukraine to buy 5,000 more missiles. So to give you an upsum of that quite long and fairly convoluted conference, a number of countries have today indicated they want to be part of the plan to secure peace in Ukraine, according to the Prime Minister. He says a number of countries have indicated they want to be part of the plan. I'll leave them to make their own statements about how they want to make their contribution. The coalition of the willing is how he described it. So he said some countries can't or won't be part of it. Some countries do want to be and can be. They are the coalition of the willing. But he was very clear and very careful to say that before even discussing the coalition of the willing, he spoke to President Trump last night and they sorted the whole situation out among themselves before broaching it with the rest of the European leaders. He says, he was asked, does the UK feel a greater personal responsibility for delivering a workable peace in Europe? And Keir Starmer says, yes, the country should step up and lead. He says, we have done that historically as a nation. We need to do it again. He announced a new £1.6 billion export finance deal, which allows Ukraine to use £1.6 billion of UK export finance to buy 5,000 more air defence missiles. He says they'll create jobs in the UK's defence sector. He says they're going to be built in Belfast. He says this will be vital for protecting critical infrastructure and it will strengthen Ukraine. He says the UK is prepared to defend peace in Ukraine. It will include boots on the ground and planes in the air. And he says we are ready to do so with others. So Keir Starmer said this from the podium inside Lancaster House. He said the UK, France and others will now design a plan to stop the fighting in Ukraine and will present this to the US. And he says the purpose of today's meeting was to unite European allies behind this. Our starting point, he said, must be to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position now, and any deal must be backed by strength. Let's go straight for some kind of digesting and explanation of all of this to our political editor, LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, who was there at the press conference. Hello, Natasha.
Good evening, Vanessa.
Well, so I've done my best to give an overview. Obviously, you were there. Explain the atmosphere and explain the impact of the Prime Minister's words.
A very tense atmosphere and a pretty apprehensive one, I think, from Keir Starmer tonight. And obviously, he's been locked in talks with these European leaders all afternoon to try and see whether they can coalesce around the same position. He, like you said, has announced this new export deal to allow Ukraine to buy more than 5,000 new air defence missiles. So that's obviously part of his plan to double down on support for Ukraine, which is what he said the UK would be doing. And he said that leaders had agreed around a few broad principles, including that they would keep military aid flowing, keep up the economic pressure on Russia. They all agreed that a lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and that this coalition of the willing that he keeps talking about is going to guarantee the peace. Now, a few, quite light on the detail, I thought, from Keir Starmer about exactly what this might look like, but a few new bits of information from him. He says that Europe now must do the heavy lifting. I think that's a really interesting change in language from the Prime Minister tonight, acknowledging that the US are not going to be a huge part of this peacekeeping deal. He refused to say the words which he said earlier to us this week, the reason why he was going out to fly out to meet Donald Trump. He said that he needed this security backstop, a security guarantee from the United States, or Putin would go back again for more. Now, no similar language from the Prime Minister on that tonight. So is he now acknowledging that the US will not play a significant part, saying that Europe are going to have to do the most of the heavy lifting here, and that is going to be difficult because we do not know who is going to sign up to this coalition apart from the UK and France, who have both committed to boots on the ground in this way, but we do not know at the moment which other nations are going to step up. And Keir Starmer has said today that all nations need to step up in the best way that they can. We all need to step up our own share of the burden, but it's unclear at the the moment whether other EU nations will be willing to put their troops on the ground, and B, whether it would be enough to deter Russia without that US security guarantee. Now, it sounded very much like Donald Trump is going to be kept in the loop on these conversations, and that Keir Starmer potentially might be having another conversation with him post this summit, but it's unclear exactly what the role of the US is going to be, and especially after what happened in the White House and the Oval Office on Friday as well. Keir Starmer said that we are at a crossroads, as now is the time to lead. This very much feels to me that he is trying to urge European nations to go above and beyond, because he does not believe that Donald Trump is going to be the one to sign up to this peace agreement. He said that we will keep boosting Ukraine's defence during peace to deter a potential invasion. That is not something that I think Donald Trump is going to want to sign up to, and that is something that I think even Russia will find obviously very difficult to agree to in any kind of peace deal. Keir Starmer said earlier today, when he was asked by some of our reporters at this press conference, what makes you think that Russia is going to accept this? And he, said we can't let Russia dictate the terms of this peace deal. We need to put our own plans on the table now. And of course, this is all going to be part of a negotiation. We do not know what Russia is going to say to any of these, but I find it extremely hard to accept that he is going to accept European boots on the ground in Ukraine. And that is a question that's going to be on everybody's lips tonight. Now, Keir Starmer did say that a couple of other countries will be willing to be part of his coalition of the willing, but he declined to say who they were. He said he'll leave the other European leaders to speak for themselves. The other question which is being raised tonight, Vanessa, is are there cracks appearing in the Western alliance between some of these EU leaders? Ursula von der Leyen, the former European Commission president, was out speaking to reporters just after the meeting. She said that it was very clear that all of these groups together needed to make it clear that no one can have their sovereign borders invaded, and that they must stand up for that. Other European nations are saying that Ukraine is going to have to accept some concessions from Russia, which might include territory. So are we already starting to see a slight breakdown in position? Keir Starmer says we need to keep united, but that is going to be very, very difficult when all of these European leaders, that's potentially always been the problem with the European Union, is that there's so many people involved and they all have slightly different interests. It's incredibly different for them to speak with one voice.
And just in terms of the kind of nuts and bolts of the suggestion and the plan, it might be quite difficult for people to understand, and I really do include myself in this, that building up the strength of Ukraine, the 5,000 missiles that are being built in Belfast, that we're going to give them the money or lend them the money to purchase, etc., and how this leads to peace is the idea that they are a more formidable opponent and therefore Russia walks away from the conflict. Is that what is supposed to be happening? Because it's quite hard to work out how kind of beefing up Ukraine's arms cache and everything else results in peace rather than further inflaming war. Don't really understand the policy properly, do you?
Yeah, that's a fair point, Vanessa, and I think there is a number of reasons why the UK and other European leaders want to get behind Ukraine and put them in the strongest possible position. Now, obviously, we're talking about a peace deal and a peace agreement, and we know that at some point President Putin and President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, if a peace deal is signed, are going to have to sort of, at some point, whether it's via Europe and the US or some other way, that they're going to have to sign an agreement. And by putting the missiles, the military strength, the money behind Ukraine, I think the belief from the West is that it puts them in a stronger position to go up against President Putin once the negotiations start happening. And secondly, it basically is to stop President Putin and to stop a potential future attack from Russia from ever happening again. And that's why I think Keir Starmer was talking just a few minutes ago about how he wanted to continue to strengthen Ukraine even after a peace deal has been struck, because this has been the whole worry from President Zelenskyy, and you heard it in the Oval Office earlier this week. He's been talking about, well, I trusted Russia before. We signed a deal with Russia before. We signed away part of our territory, and Russia just came back for more. That is the problem, and I think that is what everybody is worried about. If a peace deal is signed, are Russia going to come back again and ask for more, which is exactly why the West wants to put more, as much military support in as possible to deter that. This is exactly why Keir Starmer went to the US, to try and get that US security backing. The question is it going to be enough without the backing of the US? Because President Putin, obviously, and people talk about this, the fact that President Putin did not make any moves on Ukraine during President Trump's last presidency and last term in the White House, and believed that he was enough and that America was strong enough to deter him from making any point of incursion. If the US are not involved in this, there is a real risk that it could all fall apart. And that's exactly why Keir Starmer is here today, urging other European nations, you've got to spend more on your defence, you've got to be involved in this coalition of the willing. We can't rely on the US in the way that we used to. Trump says he supports Article 5 of NATO. At the press conference he's told us that, which is obviously a great step forward. But if he is saying behind the scenes to Keir Starmer, I am not going to be a part of this security guarantee, it means that all of these other countries in Europe are going to have to step up, or this peace deal could collapse at some point in the future.
Is it notable that there's been no mention at all of the minerals agreement?
Yeah, interesting. I thought we might hear a little bit more, I think, today from the Prime Minister on this. I'm sure it was discussed between Zelenskyy and these other European leaders today. Of course, it's on ice, at the moment after the Oval Office spat. And like I say, we were, of course, expecting that to be signed in the Oval Office, in the White House, during that press conference on Friday afternoon. And, of course, it was not to be. I still think there will be discussions about whether they can save it, whether they can rescue it. Both sides had agreed this deal beforehand, so I don't think it's completely dead and buried just yet. Obviously, both leaders involved in this incredibly humiliating, explosive public spat, but that doesn't mean I don't think that this deal is completely off the table. I think both sides saw the value in it. President Trump saw the value in having a stake in this, and Ukraine saw that too. The idea of tying Ukraine and the US together militarily was another reason that people thought actually this might deter President Putin from making another land grab on Ukraine in the future. If he is perceived to be making an attack on the US as well, would he go for it? Would he do it? And that's why I don't think it's completely off the table yet. But like you say, yes, we did not get an update from Keir Starmer on where that Ukraine-US minerals deal might be going, and I'm sure it will be something that we'll be asking President Zelenskyy whether he'd be willing to come back around the table. We heard from Number 10 Downing Street last night, government sources essentially saying we wanted him to go back in the room. The White House said we should cool off, cool heads should now prevail. I think President Zelenskyy does want to sign that agreement. I think President Trump also wants to sign that deal. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens, but I don't think it's on the cusp of being done right now.
Okay, final question. The coalition of the willing, a phrase none of us have ever heard before, and we're never going to hear the end of this one, are we? It's going to be something we hear about every 5 minutes.
It sounds really fun, doesn't it?
So the coalition of the willing. Okay, so we know it's us, and we know it's France. Who else do we think is in it? I mean, if you're taking a punt on this, I know you don't know the answer, but I mean, who do we reckon is in, and who do we reckon is unwilling?
Yeah, look, I think there are some countries, you'd like to think that the sort of Western countries like potentially Germany would be involved in this potential coalition of the willing. Other sort of allied nations potentially could include Italy as well, another ally of the United Kingdom as well. But like I say, at the moment, we just do not know. Some of them have expressed concern about being a part of this deal. It is, like you say, only the UK and France, and some other countries have been incredibly critical of Donald Trump and his comments over the past couple of days. I wonder if the Baltic states, who were not invited to this meeting in person, but Keir Starmer did speak to them earlier today, I wonder whether some of those countries might be more willing to join up, truly because they are on the border with Russia and they are facing that day in, day out, that permanent threat to their security. If indeed, Putin does not stop at Ukraine, they might be more likely to join up. But like I say, it's all a bit up in the air right now, and nobody, I think, quite knows. Hopefully, we'll be hearing from some of those European leaders exactly whether they will be signing up to this and in what form. And Vanessa, it's not just about troops. Obviously, it will be about troops on the ground in some parts, but there will be other things to discuss as well. Other security, whether they can provide intelligence, whether they can provide more military support, whether they can provide missiles, whether they can provide finance. It's not just about boots on the ground. This coalition of the willing, this peace deal, what exactly it looks like is going to require a lot of moving parts from a lot of different countries. And at the moment, we are at the very beginning of that stage, and all remains yet to be seen about whether it's going to actually deter President Putin at some point in the future, whether it's going to be strong enough, and whether that's even going to be something that he's going to sign up to at all.
Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, an excellent job of digesting the virtually indigestible there. Okay, taking your calls for the remainder of the programme. I'm Vanessa Feltz. This is LBC, the time 5:50.